this is something I really want to talk about to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. Now for context, I live in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and my friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us, so what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I'm about to talk about, we never had anything crazy happen to us. Occasionally we see a small bit of blood-like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the ground from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad, until the last time I'd gone exploring these abandoned buildings. Now when I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part mental hospital. Weird combination, I know. It closed down due to a lack of patients and a lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were about the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliche. There's fog, it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut, obviously. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small play place with flashlights we had on us. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still these old Legos, wood chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls, and toys strewn about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in the plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up, when all of a sudden I heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I all looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested we go and look to see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not too fond of the idea, but with my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic seams and must became stronger, with a hint of something else which I couldn't put my finger on at the moment. We walked in, our flashlights pointed in every direction, with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and right were the occasional metal doorways, some with the doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic, and it felt a little too hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian shone his flashlight into a room, and he stumbled back. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. "I thought I saw someone here. It seems all fine now." To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety. But looking back, I think he was completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward, when another friend swiftly told us to stop. It came to a halt and we all listened. In the distance ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echoing throughout the hall. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking towards the sound. We considered turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building, but we couldn't do that to him. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched, when finally we entered a room on the right which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its insides were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the floor. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian shone his flashlight to the corner of the room when a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assume was blood and torn beige pants. He did not have socks and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching sporadically and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine. "You guys here for the feast?" he said, each word with varying inflection and energy. This kicked us over the edge, and we bolted out of that room all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open, and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us pulling with all of our strength to close it, and just before we did, I could still see the silhouette of the man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human feature I could see. As we sat behind the metal door, catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited that spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found the man. It was stated that this guy used to go to the psych ward before it closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off of the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sickness from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse than before. There were future rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food, but nothing has been confirmed. In the end, guys, be careful. So me and my friend have been hanging out with this older guy that we've known since high school freshman year. From the start, he was quiet and it was very apparent that he liked me, so from there, me and my friend became very close to him. But recently, we started hanging out with him more since he has his own place alone now, so we can be there however long we want and do whatever we want. The first few times we went over there, it was always really late, and we would be there from 10 a.m. to 6 a.m. He always had a table smack dead in the living room full of snacks and drinks for us, which was great, but he said some creepy things here and there. He would refer to himself in third person and would constantly trauma dump about his childhood, but we would always be happy to listen and brushed off the creepy comments just because that's just how he is. Well, recently, he's gotten pretty comfortable with us and has shared stories about his past relationships and his overall thought process. He said his relationships all ended because the girls were just crazy, but now has openly admitted to being emotionally abusive and mentions how he would unalive someone, but he couldn't because, and I quote, there would be too many people looking for that person. So jumping forward to a few nights ago, the vibe in his house was really off. As soon as we walked in, he didn't greet us like he usually does. Instead, he paced around the house a little bit with large bottles of what looked like green-looking water with sandy-looking dirt at the bottom. The snack table was full of it as usual, so we began snacking on the bags of chips that he had. He finally sat down with the bottle of water and offered it to me, saying it was some special drink that he uses to detox his body and so forth. So I said, sure, why not? I take a sip, and before I swallowed it, it had a really foul taste to it that I could only describe it as poison tasting. He said, you'll feel a rush go to your head, so just drink it. But the taste was so bad, I spat it out, and he looked disappointed, while my friend was just laughing at me. Well, the first 5 minutes have gone by now, and he started talking about how he does not like wrestling and roughhousing with women anymore. I asked why, and he said, here, let me show you an example. So he wraps his arms around my neck, and before I could say anything, he started squeezing my neck and pulling upwards to the point he cracked something in my neck that made my whole body tingle. So I started digging my nails into his arm to signal to him he was hurting me, but he didn't budge, so my friend shot up and punched him and said, stop, you're doing it too hard, let her go. So he did. It only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like forever. When he did let me go, I was really dizzy and angry because he hurt me, so I left the room for a few minutes while my friend was telling him off about what he just did. But that wasn't even enough to make us leave, so we just laughed it off and moved on about it. Now a few hours have passed, and it's about 2 a.m. right now. We're all sitting in this room, and I noticed he had lotion sitting on his nightstand and asked him to put it on my back. He agreed, and I laid face down on the bed. He started rubbing it in and paid close attention to rubbing his fingers on my ribs and spine, which felt great. My friend then started talking to him, and every time he would answer her, he would apply a lot of pressure, digging his fingers or thumbs into my spine or rib cage. And I flinched, so I eventually just got up and paid it no mind. My friend mentioned she didn't like the smell of lotion and asked if he could wash his hands, so he said, okay. So we're all just laying around, and a gut feeling told me, get up and leave. So I immediately looked at my friend and said, oh my god, I left my dog outside. We should head back to my place so I can take him off the chain. She looked at me weird because she knows I never chain my dog outside, but agreed anyway, so we motioned to the bedroom door, which goes directly into the living room to put our shoes back on, and he pushed past us and said, shoot, I'll go wash my hands now. My friend said, it's fine, you don't have to. We have to leave anyways. But he didn't respond. He just quickly made his way to the kitchen. His house is extremely quiet, and the kitchen is off to the living room, dining room, so I can hear everything that goes on when he's in there. So as we're putting our shoes on, I never hear the sink turn on, but instead, a drawer opening slowly and silverware moving around very slowly. Now after this, I'm thinking to myself, what is he doing? But then the feeling of needing to leave got so bad, my heart started racing. Shot up and motioned to the door, feeling like I needed to run, and my friend quickly followed. As I grabbed the doorknob, I seen him run to the living room and quickly said, "Okay, bye, see you later." And I heard him mumble, "Yeah, bye." I'm the first one out the door, but turn around to face my friend and she's coming out, and I see him just standing right behind her with a look on his face I'll never forget. His eyes were extremely wide, looking down at her with an emotionless expression down the rest of his face, but then his wide eyes bolted to me. It felt as if I needed to snatch my friend out of the door. She unlocked her car door and I was the first to jump in. I pushed on my lock on my door and waved bye to him, but he didn't wave back. He just crouched down and watched me from his porch and said nothing to us. She finally got in, and as soon as her door shut, I pressed the lock button as many times as I could. We began backing up and driving away. I looked back at his house, and as we were moving away, he just stood there on his porch in an odd position, with his arms slightly held away from the sides of his body. When we got to the end of the street, I began telling my friend I just had a strong gut feeling we needed to leave. I explained everything to her, and she just listened to me assertively and agreeing that today's visit just felt odd. When we finally pulled into my driveway, she got a text from him saying, "Can you come back alone?" And she responded, "No, I have work and it's already extremely late." He then replied, "But you told me you would come." She said I never said that, but he insisted that she did and that she needed to come back alone. She ignored his persistence and said, "Hey, why did you wrap your arm around my friend's neck so tight?" And he replied to her saying, "Oh, she told me that I could, and then it was just a headlock. I wasn't actually squeezing hard, it just looked like I was." She then replied, "You never gave her time to say anything before you began showing us your example." But he was persistent that I did, in fact, agree to him doing that to me, and I was completely fine after. She ignored his messages, and we agreed to just avoid him for the time being because today just wasn't right. We never really went back to hang out with him or go to his house. This was about 20 years ago in an apartment in San Diego, which was a new build. I lived there with my girlfriend for about a year, then we broke up. She moved out and a friend moved in. He needed a place to crash for a couple months, and I could use the help with the rent. We'll call him Z for this story. I had a fold-out couch Z was staying on, and Z wasn't working, so he would pretty much watch TV all day or played video games while I was at work. In the evenings we partied, too much I would say. Z would always complain that he couldn't sleep and would always find himself awake in the middle of the night, staring up at one corner of the room. I never thought of this because alcohol and drugs mess with everything, so I was like, whatever, you're going to bed blackout drunk every night. So I had a DVD player with no buttons on it. You had to use the remote control to control anything, besides turning it on or off. Z bought Lost on DVD, and he yelled out, "Hey, I'm gonna start watching this." And I said, "Let me know when it loads up and I'll come out." A half hour passed and I went out to find the place a mess. Long story short, he couldn't find the remote. We then collectively tore that place apart. We spent nearly 2 hours looking everywhere for the remote. Since we drank a lot, we even checked our cars, the dishwasher, and pockets in our jeans, literally everywhere. Since Z was staying on a pull-up couch, of course we took a look at it and obviously it wasn't there. At this point we felt defeated and agreed to just go buy a new DVD player to watch Lost. We put the house back together and we're sitting on the couch side by side. And I knew it was a long shot, but I thought, I didn't check the freezer. So I said, "Hey, let me check one last place." So I went to the freezer and it was not there. And then I went back to him and the remote was on the couch exactly where I was sitting when I got up 20 seconds before to go to the freezer. Z was on his laptop right next to it the whole time. I picked it up and said, "Dude, where did you find it?" And he looked at me and turned white. We both ran outside and flipped out for about 45 minutes. Over the period of the next few weeks, stuff that carries electrical charges went missing. Electric razors, phone chargers, MP3 players, and laptop cables. Z moved out on a weekday while I was at work. The room he was staying in was empty besides the furniture. When I got home from work, all those cables were in a corner of the room. I know this wasn't him messing with me because he made me mail a few to him. So once Z moved out, for some reason, I couldn't sleep in my own bed and I could only sleep on the couch. Almost every night I would wake up sitting up on the couch staring at one upper corner of the room, just as he said he did. Where I worked, once a month I would have to work a late shift. As such, I got home at around 7 a.m., crashed on the couch. And at around 10 a.m., I would wake up and there was this old man staring in front of me, about 4 feet away from me. I played it off as if I was just tired and dreaming, but I stared at him for about a minute and realized I was awake. He wasn't dressed like an old man either. He was wearing a t-shirt, sneakers with socks that went to his calves, and a baseball cap. After about 3 minutes, he, in an unnatural way, turned to look at me, made eye contact, took a few steps away, and disappeared. I flipped out, and while I planned to move out of there in 2 weeks, I was gone in just a few days. To this day, I have no idea where that old man came from.